Oh, here he is.
Yep. Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 100. Yes, we have made a century not out.
Woohoo!
Hang on, let me just sort this. Yo. All right, and we are going to, as usual, start off with some music, and as it is his, I'll let Chris Gard do the honours.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new gods sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threats of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly profit laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Comes out to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age with dear bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all the thankless years.
Thank you for that, Chris. How are we all going today?
Fabulous. I'm wonderful today.
Cool, mate. As always, I'll ask people if they have a first subject for the stream? Starting with you, Chris. Did you have something you wanted to bring up as the first topic?
We can talk a little bit about convicts very briefly, but I'll probably wait until we get into it later because I don't want to divert too much just yet. We'll wait a bit. I'll defer to you guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm quite happy that we can do a stream on that as part of our Australian series at some point.
That's what I want to sort of save it for, but it's just been on my mind constantly now that I've just been reading this and researching and taking notes, and I'm sort of relearning my Australian patriotism through history rather than the current day.
You're reading The Fatal Shore by Robert Hughes, yeah?
I am, yeah.
It's a really good history book. It's one of my favorite history books.
Yeah, it's basically the densest delivery of all the information that I sort of needed, and it's really, really thorough. So I'm very impressed with it. And apparently he does some very impressive other art documentaries and historical work in other areas. And it's just groundbreaking.
Officially, he's what would you call him? An art critic, I suppose.
Yeah.
He's what he's best known as.
Yeah.
But that's an extremely good history book. It's one of my 2 or 3 favorite history books, I'd say.
I'm just so surprised at how much information
hasn't read it. Do check it out. I'll type it in. Good day to Lady of Shalott, who I see is in the chat. All right, Mitch, did you have a first subject for today?
I suppose there's one we'll get into later, but I've heard in Poland that the government is suffering sort of internal division because of whether to have EU money or not, because the EU are basically blackballing Poland by saying, okay, you've got to cook on LGBT and immigration even more than you have done already. Otherwise, you won't give EU money, which you will need which they will need for their budget to cope with all the Ukrainian immigration of refugees and whatnot.
Yeah. That seems to be the way the EU sort of strong arms nations into taking the corporate globalism crap.
Yeah, and the government, law and justice are split because you have a prime minister Morawiecki who's saying, okay, let's bite the bullet and take it, because if we don't, the budget will fall apart and we get blamed for economy failing. Then you've got the foreign minister, a guy called Ziobro, who's saying, no, we can't cook on our principles. Like if we take this money and abandon what we say to our elections, then we're going to be in the shit even further. So, yeah, that's essentially what it is.
I don't know where I saw it, but I saw it somewhere that people were saying that Poland, there's a lot of Poles who've worked in Britain and who didn't like our wonderful diversity, and so are hence very anti it when they go back home to Poland.
Yeah. I remember using a Breitbart article back in 2019, because it was also the same article that was saying that British Zoomers and millennials are apparently more apparently like they're a mix of right-wing and left-wing, but of the right-wing ones, they generally tend to be very radically right-wing.
Yeah. I mean, also, of course, Poland's is now starting to have significant casualties in Ukraine because there's a lot of Polish volunteers fighting in Ukraine, and quite a lot of them have been killed and wounded by now.
Yeah, there's a guy called Polish Connection on Telegram who I would shill, to be honest. Who is saying at the moment there's now confirmed like real sources of it, but he wouldn't be surprised because, of course, based Poland is like massively on the side of Ukraine in all this.
Yes, basically because they hate Russia.
Yeah, I can understand their unease about having, let's say, Russia rock up to the border, given historical animosity. But then again, Hungary and Russia have got fair reason to hate each other, but they don't. So I don't see the case for Poland.
Yeah, and then as you say, of course, Poland has probably got the largest number of refugees from from Ukraine.
Yeah. There's one city by the name of Wrocław in Silesia, which it's become controversial there because even before the war, the people there were suffering like high rents and high mortgages. It was the most expensive city to live in outside of Warsaw. And then you see the Ukrainians be given like pretty much free housing. Whereas
Hey,
Polish,
at least they're going to be getting the actual Ukrainians rather than the Ukrainians England got, which were suspiciously very dark skinned.
Well, I mean, not only that, I know from our friend, one of the friends of the channel, and also from a stream I was watching the other day, that a lot of these tax haven principalities in Europe are full of Ukrainian Ferraris and Ukrainian yachts and so on, because of course Ukraine, even prior to the start of this war, was regarded even by the United Nations as the most corrupt nation in Europe. So, you know.
Yeah, he gets even more interesting when you realise Vladimir Klitschko, I think his name is. He's got his son working for an Israeli kibbutz.
Well, it saves him going in the Ukrainian army, eh?
Yeah. Funnily enough, yeah, the guy suspiciously enrolled his son into that kibbutz a few days before the war started.
I'm sure it was totally coincidence.
But Tyler, I think Klitschko is the best person in the world, and Ukraine is the best country in the world. So please don't strike it down the stream.
I did see. Sorry if my audio is really poor, by the way. I've in the process of moving house, and I haven't got any internet where I am at the moment, so I'm using several methods to get to run this. But I did see today that certain Orthodox churches are to be banned in Ukraine that have like strong Russian cultural connections. I saw like a video of Zelensky going around, repeating this. Do we know anything more about this?
I'm sure Mitch does. Basically, as far as I understand it, they're banning the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm not the most knowledgeable because some of the terminology around religion goes over my head. But so you've got two Orthodox churches in Ukraine. You've got the Ukrainian Orthodox, which it's running a similar way to COV when it's split from a Catholic church, and then you've got the Russian Orthodox Church, which, along with a language issue, religion tends to be a divider because you get the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, all the Ukrainian speakers, all the anti-Russian types, they go to the UOC. But then you've got the Russian Orthodox Church, which has the other half of the population going to it, and they generally, I'm a priest going in most churches, parishes, whatever, generally tend to be pro-Russian, but generally tend to want Ukraine to be culturally closer to Russia, yada, yada, yada. So there's conflict there. Then with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, I've heard apparently a lot of the parish priests, they get trained by Westerners, or like they take more hints from the West, whereas the Russian Orthodox Church tends to be more its own thing. So I can imagine, for sake of argument, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church will go the same way as the COV, given due course.
Interesting. I remember researching at the start of the conflict, especially in the western part of Ukraine, the sort of border of what's Hungary and Poland. You also have like I think they're Greek. They're described as Greek Catholics church, which is like it goes back to some sort of a agreement during the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth days, but it's like a sort of a Catholic sort of church operating in that sort of part of Ukraine, and I was just wondering whether that was to become like a standardized, because one thing you notice about the current Ukrainian regime, it very much is centered around the western part of Ukraine, culturally as like that's amplified, and then because eastern part of Ukraine, and the majority of Ukraine, which is as we mentioned, majority Orthodox and culturally more aligned with Russia. It's only been like the last year that there's been this really sort of being portrayed by the West as like this there's never been that connection with Russia, even though you go. I mean, I think Zelensky even did an interview in the early 2000s where he even talked about the sort of Russian like brotherhood of the Ukrainian people. So it's been a very recent thing. That's probably since that coloured revolution. What was it, back in 2014?
Euromaidan.
That's the one. Obviously backed by the American State Department, CIA, and usual alphabet agencies to get Ukraine into Western sphere of influence.
I know there are Greek Orthodox Greeks in the eastern side of Ukraine, because I remember when the Russians were liberating one of the towns there, and Patrick Lancaster, the American journalist dude who actually goes around on the Russian side, he's one of the very few journalists that does. He was interviewing people in some of these towns that had been liberated, and they were saying, yes, we're Greeks. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah. In the case of those Greeks in like near Mariupol, they tend to be pro-Russian, and
yeah, they were, and it was Mariupol. Yeah. Thank you, Mitch. Yes.
Yeah, because it's a legacy of Catherine the Great allowing loads of Greeks refuge, like when the Ottoman Empire ruled over Greece. So the Greeks there are very Russophile, and Greece in general tends to be very Russophile from what I've seen of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose they're also Orthodox, which probably helps.
Yeah. I don't know. I might segue to like. I mean, one thing I found out earlier was the T-34 was designed by an ethnic Greek from Mariupol, which I found interesting.
Well, I didn't know that. Huh. There you go.
Yeah. Problem is Stalin gulagged him apparently, so he got killed.
What a surprise!
Yeah.
You were very lucky if you didn't get gulags by Stalin.
well, even when you design like one of the best tanks of World War II, you still get gulagged. So you can't.
I mean, Stalin like gulagged half the best generals in the Russian army before the war, which he later regretted, and one or two of them were even reinstated. I mean, what was his name? Roger Setsky, I think. One of the two.
Yeah,
sorry, you'll pronounce it better than me, Mitch.
Konstantin Rokossovsky.
Yeah, he was one of the two best Russian generals in World War II. He'd been gulagged, and the KGB had actually knocked out some of his teeth before he was reinstated because he was such a good general.
Yeah, apparently his daughter even said once in an interview, like back in the 90s, I believe, that he always had a bag right next to his door, as well as with a pistol, because either he would leave the house before the KGB would come to get him again, or would shoot himself. Because he'd never go back to the gulag.
Yeah. He was a really good general. Apparently, he started. He was actually a soldier in the Imperial Russian Army originally. Who then went over to the Reds. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's aristocratic, because in Russia, when you have a ski for a surname, it generally means you're descended from Polish people, and a lot of the Polish in Russia tend to be like aristocracy who defected over to the Russians back in the days of the Russian Empire, like Tarkovsky, for example, or in the case of Zelensky is of that certain ethnic group, shall we say? So different origins.
Dual passport holder.
The people of the Pale, as it was called.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, no, Zelensky is one of those many dual passport holders. But I think it's quite amusing. You know, you had the British Prime Minister, who is a Hindu, an Indian Hindu, saying how we're going to stick together with Ukraine, and then you've got Zelensky, who is not actually Ukrainian, turning around and closing down the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. It's just, clown world, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, even if you didn't mention his certain people of a pale status. I mean, his native language is Russian. And it's like back in the early 2010s, he was doing media interviews where he was saying, okay, well, we have to bridge this language issue up. We have to unite Ukraine, not just the Ukrainians, but also the Russians and other minorities into like one united Ukraine in all this. Fast forward a few years later, and he's like full on Euromaidan type. So,
yeah, no, it's like, you know. Anything else on that subject from anyone else on the panel?
No.
All right. Have you got a first subject for us, Attaman?
Only, I mean, I should have probably brought this up last week. I don't know if any of you have seen this story about the Supreme Court or Tony Blair's institution, or people associated with it, prosecution lawyers specifically, saying that there were sections of the Bible that are no longer appropriate for British society.
Jeez.
Yes, I heard about this.
Oh man.
Yeah, so basically it was during a court case concerning a street preacher, and the lawyers cited that I forget the first one, but it's one section in Leviticus reference both capital punishment and slavery. Of course, capital punishment based. I mean, the sections on slavery are kind of a bit, yeah, you know, that needs to be read in context, and they're obviously not doing that. And it didn't matter because none of these passages is apparently the one he read out, which was 1 Corinthians, where he says that, and then he turns around and says, in the Bible it says homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Okay.
And
so that's what they're really complaining about, is it?
Well, the thing is, it was two lesbians, and they described his comments to the police as biblical speak.
Well, that must be terrible, yeah.
Which I think is a term we should adopt, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I'm not the most Christian man in the world, but I mean, you know, Britain is still officially a Christian country. You know, you can't ban the bloody Bible, for God's sake.
I mean,
especially when you contrast it with the way they treat the Quran in the UK these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they treat it with the most sincere deference you've ever seen in your fucking life.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, how can you not treat the Bible at least as well? It's insane.
Well, it should be treated better, but yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we should regard the Quran as what it is, which is an alien religious book. But there you go.
Yeah, I mean, what's
with
worse?
Some very dubious things in it.
What's worse, throwing them off buildings or not letting them inherit the kingdom of God?
Indeed.
And then I remember at the same time here in the UK, we've also had I think it was a Cambridge dean who was been sort of preaching that Christ was a transsexual or homosexual or something along those lines.
God.
Yeah.
Based on what?
And well, on the basis that it goes into the divinity of Christ himself, and then using basically misinterpreting aspects of the Bible to make it sound like Christ what didn't conform to any particular agenda that and everything else. But I think because if you refer to that, then that means you're surely referring to God, and because God was obviously Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end, all that sort of stuff. So I don't understand even what the dean was sort of getting at. I tried to find as many articles that sort of word for word what he was saying, but even then he seems to be confusing or mixing Christ with God, or so I don't know exactly what he was getting at. Ultimately, I haven't really followed that story particularly well because it just sounds as ridiculous as you could think it could be. But it's interesting that it came up in the UK around the same time as this Supreme, this Supreme Court judgment.
And so, what's the effect of the Supreme Court judgment, Attaman? Is there one?
Well, he was acquitted, so it should be fine. But they're absolutely going to bring this argument up again, especially since none of the churches, Church of England, none of them came out and sort of brought this up and complained about it.
No, of course they didn't.
It's quite an easy statement to sort of pick apart, because, like, not to do the whole liberal thing of saying, "Oh, that's not what it says," or I should say the boomercon thing of saying that's not what it says, but that's generally not the comments it makes about slavery anyway. Of course, because it was written at a time when Christians were essentially in the minority, trying to work their way up through the ranks, and it was a case that it was a message to. Radlib has this great speech right at the event, which you can now watch on YouTube. People should look it up. And he brings this up that a lot of early Christians were actually like wives of pagans who would sort of be reverent and be humble and sort of almost convert their husbands to Christianity through subversion and in the long term, essentially.
The eternal woman.
Yes. And it's much the same, it was much the same with people who were, because there are different translations where it says servant rather than slave, and it's kind of implied that these were like people in servitude in houses and stuff.
One of the problems with the modern world is that every time when you mention slavery, the image I think in everyone's mind and every normie's mind is, of course, the transatlantic slavery and the slave plantations in the South, with the master in the master in the great big house and the blacks in the fields working the fields. But of course, many slaves as Attaman just referenced, in the Roman Empire were pretty much either house servants, tutors, teachers. They were actually quite high-ranking people. They were very high-ranking people in society, and there was I can't remember exactly where. I think it's along the Caputo Way in Rome, but there's this ancient cemetery where you can find the Roman families, very wealthy Roman families of their time, and they reburied with their slaves. And of
course, the average slave of, say, a senator had much higher standing than your average pleb who was a citizen.
There were high-ranking slaves in the emperor's household. There were slaves who were sometimes Greeks who taught Roman boys classical Greek and all this kind of stuff. And of course, it's also worth remembering that very large numbers of Roman slaves were actually freed eventually.
Slavery. Slavery in that context was a very positive thing. It actually would have been a very good thing to be born into, as strange as it sounds, because it also gave them a certain level of security. That was that's how. So when you see in the Bible and early Christians referencing slavery, it was just another normal part of life, and it was probably a very it was a very safe part, a safe existence.
If you're looking at it relative to the comparable lifestyle of someone who wasn't a slave but was destitute, you would prefer the slave lifestyle. And we're a little bit, everyone was a little bit dubious about when AA was going on about the black slaves in America versus the average sort of frontierman who was doing it really hard, had no slaves, and had to build stuff and grow stuff to survive. In the case of the slaves, they were always owned by very rich plantation owners or something like that, and so they were always housed and fed and had somewhere to sleep and never went hungry. And of course, they were treated as best as they could in order to get the most productivity out of them. So, funnily enough, compared to the hard life of the average sort of person who's trying to make a living, the slave actually had a better deal.
I think one of the things with America, and I think the reason why slavery just didn't work out there, I don't believe it's technology or sort of anything material improved. I think the problem is with the American mythos, of freedom, of liberty, it made it so that slavery probably it was an impossible system to continue. And then if you obviously compare it to ancient Rome and everything, that wasn't the glory was for the eternal city. It's Rome.
Yes,
It's for that. It wasn't a propositional sort of set of ideas in that regard. So that's probably why. And also, serfdom, other examples as well. It was for the kingdom, for the ethnic group, whatever.
I think,
in America,
AI,
I don't think it was ever.
I think AI that these days people forget that slavery was a normal part of all human cultures. And the first people to stop it were white Europeans, and the first of the white Europeans to stop it were the Brits. Until that time, it had been a normal part of every single society all around the world, of all races and all colours. And in fact, since Africa got independence, slavery is making a big comeback in Africa amongst Black Africans.
I mean, thanks to the Cameron, the Cameronites and Cameron and Obama and co and friends, they now have you got slave markets in Libya.
Yes.
And what's quite funny is where I live, in the part of England that I live, there is a long history of people in this area who were kidnapped and enslaved by Moors and the Barbary
Barbary pirates. Yes,
that's right. And one of the reasons was of the Royal Navy, and the purpose of the Royal Navy was to put that to stop. And of course, America, after its independence, sent an expedition out to put a stop as well to it.
Because the first American overseas expedition was the U.S. Navy being sent to try and stop the Barbary pirates because they were capturing so many Americans.
Yeah, and so there was I think the reason was the reason why slavery as a force to cease to exist was because the creation of a nationhood and then ethnic group in-group were being targeted by these foreigners. I think the concept of slavery was quite it was seen as barbaric because, of course, in the minds of people at that time, they wouldn't have seen slavery in their own societies. They would have thought of the worst aspects of slavery in the Arab world, which is fair enough because some of the accounts of the Arab slave trade in Zanzibar and other places in Africa. I mean, it is quite horrific. Some of the stuff that they would do, even by that sort of time, that sort of era and time. It was quite barbaric indeed.
So, did you have anything else on that one, Adam?
Well, actually, just because we've covered the slavery bit in a broader context, but they also complained about passages that you could say incite capital punishment misgivings. And here's the actual quote on them. Someone could, for example, argue for the return of the death penalty as part of a legitimate political debate. Oh, the horror.
Yeah.
And people do it, although people do it increasingly rarely these days, citing these passages in the Bible in support of their opinion. This would have value as a political speech in a democracy. It's like, well, yeah, debates around what's wrong with people debating capital punishment.
Yeah, I like it. I like it how they're saying that as if to try and shock you, and you're just like, yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I
now what?
think there's a good case for the death penalty for some murders for sure.
Yeah, there's a reason they won't do a referendum on it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same as they won't do a referendum on mass immigration for the same reason.
Yeah.
But,
so, other than that, that's kind of that's my little story for the day.
AI, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up?
He
dropped
conceded.
out.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yes, he did. Oh, hang on, there he is again. Wait a minute. AI. I was just saying, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up?
I mean, one thing I was going to sort of talk about is the in the UK, of course, this week we had the release of the census, and I wanted to tie this in because a couple of days ago I was in Bristol for work purpose, and during my travels up there, I sort of took a scenic route through the city centre and the docks where, of course, the famous Colston statue once stood. And one thing I realised going through there was, number one, imagine a gallery of the current thing, you know, Extinction Rebellion poster, BLM murals on the side of buildings, Ukrainian flags galore, EU flags. Just imagine, you know, the sort of the worst place in the absolutely the worst place in the world. But also, when you look at the people around there, all the men, well, I shouldn't say all the men, you had a large number, of course, of Black and Asian people, which is, I would say, more noticeable that I in that regards that I've seen in Bristol quite a while in all my time being there. But also, if you look, I had a sort of moment where I sat down to have a coffee, and I noticed that when you actually look at each like ethnic group, in and around the city centre, you had the Asian and Black men who were very much, I would say, you know, in appearance, I was to say normal, but sort of masculine in nature. Let's put it like that. That's how you would sort of embody a man to be. But then I saw a lot of the sort of white men, of sort of similar age, younger white men. They were very skinny. They were very much I would say odd mutant like. Their hair was dyed. They were very sort of timid in appearance, and it was very strange to watch because it was almost like, watching the result of decades of propaganda. We talked about this that there has been very strong propaganda against the native population of our countries, to favour, in the words of Enoch Powell, that the future will hold where the black man would have the whip over the white man, and that was what was going through my mind when I was watching people go about it. And it was a very strange thing to see, because maybe it's because I've never noticed it before and I'm just sort of noticing it now. But and thinking back to the census, one of the things is, that yes, there's been an increase of immigration, but also what it doesn't cover, it covers also the decline in Christianity, but it is actually more shocking that it is a proper civilizational collapse that I think we're in, unfortunately, and that is because it's such a wider problem, and it's also got me asking one other question. And I was thinking to myself, I saw a lot of Asian men, Muslim men. I assume Muslim because they were walking around with their partners or family members of some sort, women in headdresses. And so I was wondering to myself, why would what I'd assume to be virtuous, devout Muslims, why would they want to live in such a paused place, which is one would assume to be in their minds sort of degenerate in nature? Why would they want to live amongst that? And that's
a lot higher standard
of
living, mate. A lot higher standard of living than they would have back home in Pakistan, etc.
I understand that, but at the same time, surely they must realize that they're living in literally the depths of the great Satan. I mean, I understand the economic incentive, but at the same time, you know, it literally is the depths of the great Satan.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
but
seen Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying, but on the census, that was my sort of personal experience. But on the census figures, yeah, I mean, on average, we've lost, we've lost 700,000 native Brits, and also, you know, going back to the Tony Blair stuff, is during his time, of course, the term was completely abolished. It was completely uprooted. So anybody who comes into this country with a document, they're given a document, can become English or British. The term itself, I mean, the self-describing of English has been massively gone down in public use, and it's now being replaced by British, and it's all very disheartening, to be honest.
Yeah,
and as someone said earlier in the chat, that you can bring this to their attention and complain about it, but they actually use this as a form of a victory lap. They're like, oh yeah, this is a great thing. We want to see more diversity. And I mean, what was it? A 7% decline in the total proportion of majority for
it's
for
under the white Anglo-Celtic population is now under 75%, slightly.
Oh, in the cities. I think
the cities is even worse. Yeah,
in the whole country. In the whole country, I think it's still, that's including, you know, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. I think it's still 80 or 81% majority.
Yeah,
But
in England, it's just under 75%.
Yeah, and that's at least a 7 or 8% drop since the 2011 census. And people are like, oh no, what are you talking about? You're still the majority. You're still like 80%. And it's like, yeah, but that is a fucking massive decline in the total proportion. And that's also probably a couple of years behind as well. That wouldn't even be factoring in the million that just poured in, and plus whoever pours over, and their birth rates are just exploding. So it's like, yeah, we're gonna be fucked in 10 years. Well, I shouldn't say they.
In my lifetime, Britain was once, or England was once over, you know, not over 90, just over 90% white English, white British. So, yeah, I mean, this has been, of course, something happened after 1997 that no one can really figure out. But I mean, you're seeing the usual suspects, like the sort of pathetic weasel Tom Harwood, you know, rolling out the old. I call it the old, and I don't mean to sort of be horrible to older people on here, but the sort of boomer sort of you know, sort of 90s take on this, saying, oh well, there hasn't been a native Brit since the Roman times because of it. No, shut up, you absolute
fuck off.
Oh yeah, like it's not an invasion, but also we're not native because of all these invasions in the past. That
But the thing there is, of course, we're not native. We are descendants of the Anglo-Saxons. We're not, unless you're Welsh, Cornish Welsh, maybe Cumbria. You could, you know, Cumbria, Scottish, whatever. Then yes, but we are descendants of the Anglo-Saxons, Northern Germanic people. Yes, we are not Romans. Yes. Tom Harwood, big brain, fucking public education, Tom Harwood. Yes, we know that. That's not the point. We are descendants of those people, okay? But we live in the cultural legacy of the historic legacy of the Roman civilization. And this is what's really frustrating, is this is the sort of like ridiculous low IQ liberal arguments of how they get round this entire debate. And it was really, really frustrating because it goes into incredible depths of historical ignorance, and just outright, I think they know they're lying as well, deep down on this matter. And also then you have the element of, well, even if you do sort of catch them out, you go have the savage Javid response where they go, yeah, but so what? Why shouldn't Britain be a minority country?
Yeah, I thought that was classic. The so-called conservative, in inverted commas, Home Secretary turns around and says, who's a Pakistani, of course.
I mean, reform needs to put that on billboard, to be honest.
Yeah, that should be
Well,
on the billboard.
I also hate that argument too about not being actually native Brits. But I mean, like, at what point do you classify yourself as Indigenous? I mean, Sargon brings that up all the time. It's like, if you've been there for 1,000 fucking years, surely by that point you're Indigenous to that land. You are tied to that land deeply.
Yeah, so
If you
you
look
take
at
them.
if you look at ancestral, there was a study done by several universities on this of ancestral lineage of people, current native Brits living in this country. You see that there is quite clear ancestral links back to, as I mentioned, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Jutes, the old kingdoms. You can actually see this. I had this great graph where you can actually see the sort of legacy of the old various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and Jutes and various people who settled here, and you can see in that many of these people who settled here, who are our ancestors, I mean, they predate some of the the native tribes in America. They predate it predates the Arabs' expansion into the into much of the Arab world in North Africa. So yeah, I mean, if we can't be native, if our ancestors and people, if we're not considered native, then no one is, because it's ridiculous. It's an apps, but it's, again, as I say, it's a deliberate ploy.
It's a con job, basically.
But also, I've made this argument before. People in chat can go back and check out the Splendid Isolation Black Catalogue. But if anyone remembers back to that paper that the Tory parties did, that Boris commissioned, where they did a paper into systemic racism, or a report into systemic racism, they said it didn't exist, and all the sort of leftist water carriers for the establishment lost their fucking tits over it. And they, in that report, it says that that actually the most deprived areas in the country are sort of white British areas, and they say that like people that are like migrant descended, they will move around to wherever the work is, as people that like have lived in this community, they just stay there when it goes down hill. And it's like, it's almost as if they're connected to the soil and the place in some way.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that there's quite a lot of British DNA, which goes back to the people who were called beakerware, people who came into the UK not long after Stonehenge was built. So, and then as someone in the chat has been saying, the Maoris are considered indigenous in New Zealand, and they've only been there since, I don't know, 1600 or something like that.
About the 17th century sometime.
Yeah. They got there about the same time as white people got to South Africa.
Yeah. Arlo's saying in the next comment, Maoris ate the previous natives. I don't think that's true. I think they just, they co-inhabited the islands with the Morioris. The Morioris were native, or not native. They populated the Chatham Island, and the Maoris just killed them and ate them because they were bigger and stronger.
I was going to say, I quite like that founding myth of New Zealand founded by cannibalism.
founded by cannibalism, destroyed by feminism.
That's pretty true. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's ridiculous to argue that the Anglo-Celts are not indigenous to the British Isles. It's just insane.
Oh, there you go. 555 says you can only be indigenous if you have darker skin.
Well, that is the truth of it. I mean, they will recognise like the Turks as indigenous to Turkey, like, which was like a blink of an eye ago.
Fucking hell.
Oh yeah, I mean, these are, of course, these are the same people. Every St. George's Day, they go, just remember, Gammons, just remember St. George was the Turk. He was a fucking Turk. He was, he had his own fucking kebab shop and everything.
I always like to point out to these people that he was actually a Christian Roman soldier, but there we go. A Greek-speaking Christian Roman soldier. Long before the Turks ever got to what is Turkey today. So
rides in on his camel with a shisha bowl on the back of it.
Oh man,
Well, I
It's
mean, but
just-
here's
it's
another
just
interesting
propaganda.
thing off the back of it. So, like, last independent thinker in chat said, we have to learn to milk that guilt cow. I mean, like the whole rights for whites argument that they used to slag off back in the day. Like, people are pushing for that now, and it's probably like something that you should use, but there's also a large part of me that thinks that the problem with that is that only kind of, I think, makes the demoralization worse.
Mm.
Because
I don't think you can win by being a victim. Especially on the right. I mean, the left can do it, and it works for them. But you can't. I don't think right people on the right, or traditionalists, I should say, if you have a traditionalist sort of mindset, it has to be from a point of spiritual sort of vitality and natural strength. I think it can't be from a point of weakness. And when you look at any sort of group throughout history which has been any sort of like a, let's say, reactionary or traditionalist in nature, they don't sort of play the victim card. They usually have they sort of play the strength, honor, valor, that sort of stuff.
Like, the
I
thing
think
is, well, if you
difficult to do it from the right, to play the victim card. I think it's difficult, and it's probably, as Attaman said, it's like, I think our people are so bloody demoralised already. I'm not sure we should try and make that worse.
well, like Doxastic Draco in chat, which you highlighted, saying about being Welsh, don't make it part of your identity. Of course, there's, I mean, I've quoted it before, but there's that bit where Bowden is talking about, oh shit, I can't remember the guy's name now. It's a Welsh writer, and he says that the guy was from Cardiff, and he used to say that he hated the Welsh, and he used to identify as British because he used to say that the Welsh sort of built their identity out of like weakness and victimhood. And the thing is, like you can play the victim, and that will get you some ways. But it's almost just a part of controlled decline at that point. Like, if you want to get an actual strongman, if you want to get someone that like an elite that bats for your side, there has to be a certain poise and strength that resonates out of you as a group.
Yeah, I mean, I think Doxastic Draco has said in the chat, I am for pointing out actual persecution. Yes, I think where our particularly our straight young white men are constantly being bombarded with propaganda and brainwashing. That sort of thing you've got to be able to point out.
And
the reason every advert in the country features mixed race couples,
it's also important to remember that in many of the top positions for young people, like internships, whether it be in, like, say, the BBC, not just BBC, many news outlets, communications, and charity groups, parliamentary positions, special advisors for young people. They are it's all done on sort of a diversity hire scheme, and you have many of them where they say, white men, young, if you're white male, you need not apply.
Yeah,
and
I mean that was even happening in the Royal Air Force recently. They weren't accepting straight white men, and of course the vast majority of RAF pilots are straight white men.
And of course, if a war was ever to break out, they need like in America, the AA has said this. They need the white boys, rural, working class, and sort of suburban white boys, patriotic, to die for them in their wars. And so, I mean, in the RAF, I mean, the RAF has been a big disgrace, and my father was in the RAF, and he when he heard that, he was I never heard him get as very. He's not very sort of a bit like me. He's not very much like a sort of preachy sort of man to lose his temper, but he lost his temper with that in a very big way. I imagine a lot of people who served in the RAF now, when they look at it, I mean, he said he just didn't recognise it. It was absolutely absolutely disturbing. But at the same time,
I mean, look, the truth of it is, AI, that if we did find ourselves in a war, these immigrants would not be stepping forward to join the British Armed Forces. I can assure you, they just wouldn't.
Someone in chat pointed out, yes, it is Bill Hopkins. That's right. That Bowden was quoting and talking about in that speech.
No, okay, fair enough. But yeah, I mean, the fact is that these immigrant people are vastly overrepresented in British media. Even going on the latest census figures, they are vastly overrepresented, not underrepresented at all. And of course, it's also the same thing is also true in Australia as well.
Yeah, and also the problem is, as I mentioned, is that under the sort of Blair legislation, I mean, technically the English person on a legal standing doesn't exist because it can mean anyone. And that is the problem. And same with British, I mean, and of course with being the British person. Now, being a British person, we all know, in my mind, if you British is someone who is ethnically English, Scottish, Irish, or Welsh. That would be my sort. That's my, or not maybe Northern Irish if you want to be very technical, and leave the other half to Stu and their own mess.
For now, anyway, until the EU get their way. But,
yeah. But I mean, now I mean, in Scotland, in the Scottish last year, they changed also. You had people arriving from Ethiopia, Somalia, and they were just classed. Oh yeah, they're Scottish, and it's like, oh, there we go. That's so the ethnic component. Because one of the things I think, and this is something which is not not many people on the right will talk about because it's or people like even Carl Benjamin maybe won't want to talk about because it's a bit of a problem because it does sort of go into the realm of when the left say that race matters. Well, the problem is they are right in some regard, but of course they've reached the wrong conclusion because from their conclusion is we need to show a complete hatred of our own group in favor of these minority groups. But in reality, a good part of the of culture is the ethnic spirit within that, which is why like as you mentioned, why do people stay in towns and villages when they're going downhill? Because they have a certain connection. Okay, what connects them all together? Well, it's the fact they're all from the same ethnic group, and that's a deep tribal sort, and that is a legacy of a deep tribal component in the English spirit. And it exists in all groups. That's why when Indians move over here, they all congregate. They don't go into the rural rural villages and towns with that's no one from their same group. They all stick together, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just something to be expected. It happens everywhere. It's happened everywhere in human history, and so. Maybe that's something that needs to be explored further in our circles. That you have to really accept that the racial aspect is actually quite important in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think many of us would doubt that these days. To be honest with you, I mean, I've always thought it was quite important.
No, I don't. No, I don't think. I mean, this is something that Bowden and BAP at the moment's been very sort of talking a fair bit on this discussing this matter. Yeah, culture is a reflection of ethnicity.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, John Best in the chat is saying he got mad at Sargon's lot because they said it's culture, not nation. But I mean, the thing is, the culture is part of the nation, so which is part of the ethnicity. It's all very closely related and linked.
I think I do like Carl, and I think he is. I don't think he's a bad actor or anything like that. I think he's a good guy. He's a very intelligent guy, and he is someone who is definitely you have to watch. I think the problem is because a lot of people who got behind the anti-SJW stuff, where their sort of attack vector was, as I say, race. And many people on the anti-SJW side, they're sort of against them was actually saying, yeah, actually race doesn't matter, it's about quality of character and everything, which obviously quality of character is important in the personal and individual level. Yeah. But the problem is they can't get behind the sort of stuff that BAP and Bowden and many people on the right have talked about on the sort of race ethnicity aspect because it does undermine a lot of what they said in the past.
Yeah,
I think that's the problem.
Yeah, look, to be fair to Sargon, he has come quite a long way rightwards over the last few years. And his positions today are a little bit more realistic than they were like 2-3 years ago. But yeah, I'm not one of these. What would you say? I'm not like a classical liberal. Don't pretend to be. And if you're not a classical liberal, then I think it's much easier to embrace the fact that part of being British is being Anglo-Celtic and having a connection to the country and relatives who fought in its wars and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that is obviously important. And one of the things that's being heavily attacked is British culture and British history and British tradition. And saying, they're not doing it for nothing. They're not doing it because they don't know how important it is.
And saying societally that race doesn't matter is, I think, it's sort of denying human instinct. And we've got a hierarchy of perception when we encounter a new person, and the first thing on that list is race, and then gender, and then size, and then you just assess that you go down the various levels of perceiving them. If they're of a different race, that's immediately the first thing that you notice before you even notice they're a man, before you even notice they're old or whatever. So,
look, you can talk to if you go and talk to a Zulu in South Africa, and you ask him about, say, the Xhosa or another tribal group in Africa, they don't consider themselves the same, and they consider themselves better than the other groups.
Exactly,
this is like a natural human way of being.
Yeah. And we've evolved that way. Like that's a specific instinct that we've evolved. So to deny it and say that it doesn't matter and that we can just go by a cultural ethnos and ignore the race that underpins it. It's like, you're really just lying to yourself. Sorry, it's not how it works in reality. As much as we want it to be otherwise, it's a lie.
It's important to remember that, of course, this is all a normal position, and we are all sensible centrists.
That's right.
we are all centrists. We're not right wing. We're not left wing. We are centrists. This is the sensible centrist position because this is the position that has existed since the beginning of man.
I'm not sure that I agree with the sensible centrist label itself, but the point of it, i.e., it's the majority position of most people, I certainly do agree with.
Okay. We are not radical.
I was just going to say, I'm Duke. Are you a revolutionary? Do you want to uproot the natural order in by the left wing utopian? No, then you are a sensible centrist. There you go. Simple. That's basically it.
I mean, I'd like us to go back to where we were, but not in the 1990s. That's not enough. You've got to be a bit more radical than that.
1450s. That's my.
Well, I always say about the 1890s, but I reckon that's somewhere around where you want to be.
I will still beat the drum that the real collapse of mankind began with the collapse of the Bronze Age with the Sea People. So I want to go back to.
I'm thinking Abraham.
John Best
go back about 5,000 years.
Yep.
But I mean, just on the census. I mean, here's a white pill and then a black pill. I mean, the white pill is that. This is obviously only the census for England and Wales, as opposed to the previous census that was for Britain. So, if it included Scotland, it would actually be maybe a point or so higher, maybe. So it's probably actually it's only declined by around 5.5%, and it's actually probably a little less than that if you made the census the same, recorded it around the same boundaries and controlled for the same things as the previous census.
Yes,
that's still a black pill.
Yes. Okay, so here's the other black pill. A huge amount of them are all old people. So sort of in the next 30 to 40 years, you're going to see a massive slump in that figure. And of course, the decline is probably going to accelerate because less and less of those people are having children. So, and then less and less younger people are having children as well. So,
can we start like, because we got big enough like content? Can we just start like a 4chan thing where we tell young British people just to start like banging each other? I mean, I don't know what else to do.
Well, I'd like to see Britain have the kind of policies that Orban has in Hungary, where he encourages families.
Or that Japanese prime minister that was assassinated. What was his name? Shinzo Abe. Abe. I mean, his basically was just telling the young people, just have sex. All of you have sex. Reproduce. That's really what it comes down to.
And yet Japan, of course, doesn't have to resort to mass immigration, even though it has the same problem as a falling indigenous population. I
never thought I would say this, but in many ways, council state teen pregnancies might save where British civilization.
I'm not sure about single mothers, mind you. I think that's another one of the issues that that faces us. Single mothers are very good for kids, especially boys.
None of this matters while we continue to have a hostile government that hates us in power.
Yes. I mean, look.
I'm Duke. If it was a white mother with like a single, like she could have 10 children, single white mother, I'm willing to trade that than what the other possibility future is.
But the problem is that single motherhood actually also drives down the birth rates because the meme of like a single mother with multiple kids from multiple men is actually really rare. Most single mothers have one child, boyfriend leaves her, and then she's just completely out of the dating market for life.
Okay. I don't know. Look, I suppose we need to talk about this. I think I am less and less hopeful for Britain. I've got to say, I am, and I think one of the last chances we have is coming up now. If the total con that is the Conservative Party can be totally destroyed.
I actually joined the Reform Party.
Good.
I'm not saying like, my populism or a return to this. I'm just seeing it as a vehicle to do my own little bit to destroy that party.
And it's small enough relative to say the Conservatives. It's small enough that actually our side of things could have a much bigger influence within that.
Well, this is of course my other thing as well, is that I mean they sent me a letter and they said in there that they're the fastest growing party in Britain, and which I can absolutely imagine that's true. Going from, let's say, 1,000 to 1,200 members is probably quite an enormous amount of growth in the party affiliation.
They do actually, from what I've been reading, they do actually seem to be growing very quickly, and they're getting a lot of former Conservatives.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, I've got experience working within campaigns on local levels and that. So I'm seeing this purely as a vehicle for propagandization and an objective of destroying the Tory party.
Look, I mean, I know people say that reform is quite moderate on a lot of things, but that can be changed.
Yeah.
You're never going to change the Conservative Party. If everyone doesn't realise that now, the Conservative Party is unreformable.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to change. It's just going to keep getting worse, like it has now.
I mean, ultimately, the Conservative Party they do have principles. They're just incredibly left wing ones, and so that is problem one. Also, problem two is if the Conservative Party was to collapse, the worst elements of the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, it's not like chucking the Ring of Power to Mount Doom and all of Sauron and all his minions all perish with it. The problem with the Conservative Party, if you destroy the Conservative Party, a lot of those those poor elements of the Conservative Party. I mean, the hope would be, they go to their natural home in the left wing,
which is Labour or the
Labour Lib Dem. Yeah. But there's also the risk that they may try and work and worm their way into places like Reform and perpetuate the problem elsewhere.
I think that would be much more difficult for them.
Well, yes, and that's why I want to talk about the benefits of gatekeeping, because gatekeeping is actually a very, very important thing to do in that regard, because these people will, they will latch themselves onto onto these populist movements. And I will say this: you also have people who can be, on the surface they appear like they're on your side, but in fact they are doing the jobs of their opponents. And I didn't want to mention this. Again, I've been out of the because of moving and everything. I've been out of the loop for a couple of weeks now, but I've been seeing stuff with what's happened in America with the Trump movement and a certain rapper and Mexican catboy and everything.
Yes.
And so those sorts of jokers, and I've been catching up on it yesterday, and from my sort of brief sort of understanding of it, it's so bizarre and so outlandish that I honestly think that this is just a massive setup to undermine any sort of possible return for Trump. And
yes, that's what I think too.
but then at the same time, I don't think crazy rapper and Mexican catboy and gay Greek speaker, university speaker, are necessarily in the pockets or being paid by any alphabet agencies. But I think they're just all of them are just got a screw loose, to be honest. And I think they get pushed in a direction. And then
that's putting it lightly. I mean, they all come across as mentally ill.
Well, I mean, who in their right mind
all three of them
would trust anything Milo does?
Yeah, for fuck's sake.
I mean, Milo should have a great big, massive, flashing neon sign above his head saying, "Don't trust me."
Yeah, fair.
Yeah,
Really,
I mean, I was kind of a bit. I mean, I don't see Kanye as some sort of ally or our guy or anything, but I was kind of enjoying watching him push the needle little by little. But as soon as Milo touches that, yeah. But as soon as Milo touches that, that is worthless. The only observation I will say, I'll make, which I think means that this isn't completely dead, is that some of my very, very normie co-workers were bringing up about what Kanye had said. And then they actually saw a picture of what he was dressed like when he was there, and they suddenly then saw it as if it was like a joke or some sort of comedy performance.
Just fucking theatre.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know. Like Milo, I think he's just a bad actor. The rapper dude, I think probably definitely does have a screw loose. But the other dude, Fuentes, I think he's too intelligent not to have known the bad effect that him going to see Trump would have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rapper dude, I think he has. I mean, of course, he was around in Hollywood, and we know Hollywood and people who run and operate in Hollywood, and I think he's had a few bad experiences. I think he's plus that with being married to the Kardashians and and having a screw loose in general.
Look, I think that to be fair, AI, I think that some of the stuff that this Kanye dude was saying was absolutely true.
Yeah,
about the small hats.
I'm a little
but
bit.
The trouble was he took it. He went off the deep end instead of just leaving it where it was. Whereas Attaman said he was actually pushing the needle a bit.
It seems like this Pasternak character is actually integral to the whole story. That's what it seems like. I want to find out more about this fucking Pasternak person.
I mean,
yeah,
like
just out of interest.
Like like last year, I wouldn't have believed that the thing I'd be learning this year is that there's some sort of Hollywood personal trainer Jewish cabal that's like drugging.
Connect all of them together.
I mean that's probably one of the craziest things that's come out of all of this.
But it's a pity because at one stage he was actually pushing the needle a bit, but when they got this clown trio together and they went to see Trump and then they went on the Tim Pool show, it all turned into a complete farce.
I mean, I think it just went to. I think it became obvious when he went on to Alex Jones and where he just said he likes mid-century mustache man and everything. And the thing there is, at that point, I mean, number one, you've just broken you've broken the needle completely. You've just torn it out of its place, and it's gone flying out the window. And the problem is, I can foresee, the clips that have been going around on social media and everything that I've seen on Facebook. I can see governments around the world use that the argument for internet censorship and for the UK for Ofcom to have an oversight because of that sort of interview, because the left like to say, oh, these right wingers like to push pro-Nazi, like Nazi dog whistle and everything, and then you have this absolute and spastic like Kanye who actually just goes ahead and does it. Sorry to use that term
and then
on
sits on a show wearing a sack or something over his face.
Yeah, and then what the hell was that with like Benjamin Netanyahu thing? Like, what the... I mean, it's absolutely. I did watch it all the way through because I mean, I do like watching someone have a bit of a breakdown. To be honest, it's but at the same time, it's put a lot of people on that side of things back, quite a few years, and I think the negative impact is there may be. I mean, first of all, like Trump, he's not. It's DeSantis who's going to be, the darling of the GOP from going forward. Trump's not. He's never going to have another chance of going ahead.
I don't know. I mean, look, I think that there are people in the Republican Party who don't want Trump to run, and if anyone was behind this, it was those people, not the Democrats, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I don't know. Look, personally, I'm not sure about DeSantis. Like, I'm not American, don't pretend to know much about American politics. People who I know who do follow American politics, like Don, for example, tell me that DeSantis is probably better off being the governor of Florida rather than running as president.
Can actually wield power properly as a government in a state way more than he ever could as a president. So,
yeah, and Ben
Gard, what you want, got to get the fuck out of this. This just federal obsession. They do the same thing here in Australia. It's like at the end of the day, the federal government really only has power over things like your income tax and all that sort of stuff. All the main changes you're ever going to get is from your state government.
Yeah, that's a lot of truth in that. And in a federal system like Australia and America, that's very true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I would. I mean, I don't think Trump's really our guy, but he's the most likely guy to do anything that people on the right want. And there are, as I said, not only the Democrats, but also a lot of piss weak water Republicans don't want him to run again.
This is unrelated or sort of tangentially related, but I learned this. I can't remember where I learned this from, but apparently in certain states in America, like in towns and that. I think I heard this on Pete Quinonez's talk with Semiagog, where you can, because being a sheriff is an elected position, you don't actually have to be a policeman to be elected as sheriff.
In America, yeah.
And a sheriff can literally, like anytime any alphabet agencies want to come into the town, the sheriff can literally go, no, fuck off. It's like that, like the autonomy, like the sovereignty that a sheriff has is actually like larger than what the federal government can impose. So that's really interesting.
Well, the people are always on our side are always saying you should try and act locally. The trouble is in Britain's case, it's not a federal system, and like the local councils have relatively little power. Yeah. And the smaller the council and the easier it is to get into, the less power it has. So I still think that, one of the last chances for Britain is now and destroying the Conservatives. Because if the Conservatives are going to get destroyed, there's never been a better time to do it. Because they are so weak. And they're in such a weak position because of the coup inside the Conservative Party, where even ordinary Conservative members didn't get a vote. Yeah. And Sunak was just appointed, basically.
Yeah.
And there's ever increasing rumours, which I strongly suspect have truth behind them, about Sunak trying to do a Switzerland type deal with the EU, which I really do believe, and even giving away Northern Ireland. If you're going to destroy the Conservatives, now is the time to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, because some people have said, like, oh, joining reform's pointless. Like, to me, joining reform and saying they're not going to do anything. I understand. I get it. They probably aren't going to do anything. Nigel Farage hasn't even really hinted that he's going to return. It's just kind of wishful thinking.
He pretty much has.
Not really.
I don't know.
He's kind
I've
of walked
watched
around the topic. He hasn't.
I actually heard him say that if he can get 1 or 2 Conservative MPs as defectors, he will come back.
And he said he would run a roster, but he hasn't said yet. We haven't heard of any of these that exist. I don't know if this is waiting, in which point it could fall apart. But either way, there's no evidence that he's actually going to come back. Not yet. Even if he does, he might not be able to achieve anything. He's been out for a few years. He gets blue balls all the time whenever he gets close to being able to do anything. All of that aside, the thing is, reform is currently filling up with disenfranchised Conservative voters. People that were probably always to the right of the Conservative Party, that voted for them because they saw them as the lesser of two evils. They never really liked the party. They just did it because it was buying us time, is what they thought. And those people are now sitting there sort of ripe for the picking. And we should be going into these spaces and, picking out the good eggs and or the good apples, I should say, and bringing them into our circles, building networks that transpose the Reform Party and overlap with our own.
Yeah, I mean, look, I totally agree with you, Attaman, and I think that you could even combine this with AA's thing about this sensible centrist idea. Like, although I hate that title, but yeah, I mean, if we're going to get these people, we shouldn't be presenting ourselves as dissidents who are, want to break everything. Because we don't. We really want to put things back together again.
I mean, it's important to remember that this whole sensible centrist thing is that ultimately our views that we've stated here tonight, they are, as I say, they are normal views. The majority of the British public, if they were to listen to us tonight, unfiltered, uncensored, unrestricted, would agree largely with the positions we set out. But the problem is, our views are they're told that our views are fringe and they are a minority, which is not true. They'll
call us far right extremists.
Yes, so we are the sensible centrists because we, as you say, we are not extreme. We don't want to uproot society. We don't want a utopian vision of society. We don't want to corrupt or disturb the natural order, that unlike what people on the left and maybe you could argue also people on the far right also want to do. Sort of revolutionary aspects of the far right, I would say. So yes, we are not, that's why we are sensible centrists.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, I'm quite happy to call myself right of centre, because I'm not a centrist, I am right of centre, and I think most people, at least socially, are conservative. With a small c.
In the 1800s, you would have been a progressive Duke.
Probably, yeah. But in some respects, I probably would have been, but not by much, I don't think.
And even then,
I'm pretty right wing, to be honest.
Even then, reading the opinions of some of what was classified as progressive back then, you're just like, holy shit, that's spicy.
Yeah.
Return.
Yeah. But yeah, no,
progressive.
I do think that for Britain and British people, this is one of our last chances. Because if you can destroy the Conservative Party, and you could, and people in the chat have been saying, "Oh, Labour's going to win the next election." Yes, I totally agree. Labour is going to win the next election. But
that'll be the last nail in the coffin.
I don't know about that. Can Labour really be much worse than the Conservatives today?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we've got to. But the bottom line is, we have to stop. We have to stop putting our energy into keeping this party going. That's only ever just keep stabbing us in the back.
Yeah.
Just
Yes.
a little
Yes.
softer than the other one.
Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
It's about
And
okay, yeah,
we need a new right of centre party, and the only way that can happen is if the Conservatives are destroyed.
Well, to be honest, I'd just be happy to destroy this facade of a two-party system.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's-
even if the Conservatives are reduced to a rump, and you can get somebody like Reform or even a coalition of Reform and other small right of centre parties, and you can start getting some of those guys into Parliament, if you can hopefully get 2 or 3 real Conservative MPs to defect, which I think is entirely possible at the moment, or come the next election anyway. Yeah, that's the only chance we have of changing things peacefully, or of changing things at all, short of a total civilizational collapse.
I mean, I don't think we can ever escape the institution of a two-party system, because it represents the duality of man, which is like this tension between entropy and progressivism and order and conservatism. So like it's a natural a duality of man, and so like most political institutions will end up being that system with an independent on the side nipping at the heels. But it actually works when you have both parties that do actually represent those different sides of the society. But at the moment, we just have 2 progressive left-wing parties, and that's it.
And
So
neither of whom in Britain represents ordinary, actual, real British people.
Yeah. But
So,
when they are actually opposites, they complement each other, and they do create a wrestling match that sort of gets results. But at the moment, it's literally just 2 progressive parties just telling us what we're going to do, and then that's it. You got no choice. Sorry.
Well, I mean, in Britain's case, literally, I mean, no one voted for Rishi Sunak. So,
I didn't vote for him.
Nobody did. He was appointed.
I honestly think there's also ultimately I don't actually think in an election any British person, and when I say British person, I mean British, the real British people would vote for an Indian, if I'm absolutely honest. I don't think
Sunak was rejected by the Conservative Party as Prime Minister twice.
Yeah.
He was rejected by the Conservative Party members twice, which is why they didn't let it go to the members last time.
Yeah, they kind of all these Tory MPs that have been shouting from the rooftops about how their members weren't really racist now had to come to terms with the fact that their membership was actually pretty racist.
Yes.
In a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. In group preference, nothing wrong with it, as we were saying earlier.
Well, I'm trying to remember who was presenting it. I think it might have been the Lotus Eaters. They were discussing like the history of Sunak, like when he first got his safe seat after Hague, and how he basically just failed his way up. It's just like every sort of self-initiated public sort of activity, he basically just fucked it up constantly and was the most unrelatable, uncharismatic person. But he just had $1 billion, I guess. So. Yeah, but in terms of his public image, he literally just failed up. It's fucking insane.
Well, also the Conservatives, although they claim not to, they do actually run a policy where they will make sure that on every list for a candidate, there's at least one woman, always.
Mm-hmm.
And they have absolutely been pushing forward brown and black people, which is why there are so many in the cabinet today.
That was written in by Cameron, the sort of equality sort of selection. Because of course, what used to be with the Conservative Party is that to become an MP, you would have to be selected by your local membership in constituency membership. You put your name down and you'd be selected, and you'd go through the green by your members. Today, I think you have. Last time I remember, because many years ago I was a member of the Conservative Party, and a couple of years ago I actually stood as a councillor for them, though I didn't win. But that being said, if I remember correctly, to be an MP, you have to put your name on like this short list. You have to put, I think, I want to say like £2,000 deposit on that shortlist, like to stay on the shortlist, and then you're given like, well, okay, here's a list of seats you can stand in, and it could be like, in theory, you could be living in like southern England, and they say, well, do you understand in a seat like up in the Western Isles or somewhere like that, up in Scotland or something, and with Rishi, he has no connection to Richmond and York, where his seat is. He has literally no connection to it. But when he was, exactly. But the funny thing is, when he was, when he was first selected, it was him against this woman who was like a local councillor for the area, and of course, she was a local English woman. Obviously, didn't get it. He got it, and the same with Liz Truss. Kwasi Kwarteng, Braverman. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Not just the ethnic component, but just the low IQ sheer incompetence component. There seems a pattern is emerging.
Bio-Leninism is what it's called. See,
Exactly.
Triple Five's comment there. I think you all underestimate just how anti-racist modern British white people are. Yeah, that's stated preference. Triple Five.
Yeah,
they all have a revealed preference when it's
it is a very complicated subject because like there are videos going around of which I think are in America, but you could absolutely do the same thing here of like Zoomer women basically being guilted into like kissing black blokes because they call them a racist if they don't. And and it's like you will if I say racist things at work, which I do, I very much take the privilege of working in a small firm where I'm considered very highly regarded, and I abuse that privilege.
Very good.
And they will sort of cringe and at some of the comments, and they'll kind of get a bit huffy. But when a black person comes and works in the office, they all have a problem with him. And they won't say why. But when he's shown to be incompetent and quite low in intellect, they assume certain things without saying them.
This was what broke me on the topic was when I was younger, when I was in university down in South Australia. At that point, when I was living there, I was very like I'd sort of become like institutionalized by progressivism by being there, and sort of became a little bit more lefty as I was there. But what broke me out of the pattern was when we were forced to do a group research project, and we had I think it was like Kenyan or Nigerian, and he was utterly fucking useless. And I was like, how are you even allowed into this university? And he was completely retarded. And I was just like, all right, well, okay, I guess this is what we're faced with. And that sort of broke me out of the paradigm.
Yeah. When I was I don't know, maybe 12, 13, and at school, we had an Indian maths teacher whose English was so bad you literally could not understand what she was saying.
Yeah.
And she was trying to, I still to this day use it as an excuse why my maths are so terrible. But anyway.
what a great addition to the institution, eh?
Yeah, I mean, she must have had whole generations of little English kids who didn't learn any maths because they couldn't understand a word she was saying. But anyway,
that's right.
When I was overseas, we had there was a lot of Israeli kids that were nasty to me. So that's why I'm a very big racist now.
Mitch, you haven't said anything for a while. You got anything to add to this stuff?
I mean, I remember like there was going to say about with like the Pakistanis in the UK, it's what? So the women are going to become liberal because that's just the way things go now. And what you're going to get, I mean, this is a pretty black-pilling thing I'm going to say is because the Pakistani women are going to liberalise like the British women have done, you're going to see the quote incel types in the Muslim community just do a lot more terror attacks. So that's
certainly possible.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen is the Pakistani women are just going to become I'll be controversial for the same as but becoming as slutty as modern English women a lot of the time. And they'll just completely shun all the Pakistani men. And Pakistani men...
Don't they have like arranged marriages and all this stuff, or is that dying out?
I mean, I bet what's going to happen is Global Homo, after it's done sorting the likes of us out, they're going to go to work on Islam, because there's no way that Global Homo is going to let Islam predominate the UK, for example. We're just not. They will try and gay up the Muslims, just like they will do with us and the Chinese, for example.
I will say this: when I was in Bristol, and I saw a lot of the I saw some of the younger the younger Muslims they wear the headdresses, but they were wearing like what I would say is a very non-Islamic. And I've lived in a country which is not Islamic country, but like half and half Islamic, half Christian. They were wearing very like revealing, I would say, for their group clothing items, which again, it's old.
Globo Homo is definitely going to have its effect on those people too, for sure.
Yeah, the West is a trap for them, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, what was it they were doing? They were like the Americans were putting huge amounts of porn into Iraq and all this kind of stuff at one stage. It's I don't know. It's like yes, it's not going to be good for them, but on the other hand, I don't really care about them, to be quite honest with you. It's they are somewhere where they don't belong, basically. But that sort of stuff is a long way down the road.
The Ayatollah of Iran has been proven right again. Yeah,
I mean, you can't say that when he was talking about the great Satan in terms of pornography and all the rest of it. You can't say he was wrong about that.
No. Yeah. The Taliban is like the most basic Taliban is our greatest hope.
Oh well, look. I mean, I never did agree with that when the people on the right, when the Afghanistan was evacuated and people on the right were saying how basic the Taliban were.
This is the thing too. Is I was thinking to myself, they're not going to be able to actually directly gay up the Middle East. But then I'm thinking, no, the Middle East has women in it, and they can gay up the women, and they're the ones that are subverting it from the inside. Look at Iran.
Yeah, absolutely right.
God. No one's safe.
No, it's always women who are the easiest to do that, because women tend to be they're lemmings. Most women, of course, there are some exceptions, but
they're empathic.
They're empathic. Go along with whatever is popular.
That is a good point that Chris has mentioned it, because I do think that ultimately the way that you stop Globo Homo is you remove women from the marketplace. I think that also, like the fashion industry, has to be abolished. Things that prevent the women from the marketplace, that push these sorts of problems. I think that is stuff like that. That's the sort of how I think that, because I can't really think of a way out of it. That
this is where Orban in Hungary is sensible, because like he does this policy whereby married women who have kids get free land or a free house, and then they don't pay income tax after a certain number of children.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, with Hungary, there's also this. So the government actually intervenes in the universities. So the only university in Hungary where the government don't have a say is the Open Society Soros Foundation one in Budapest.
Yeah. I mean, the problem though is, yes, Viktor Orban has managed to turn Hungary into a very based and sort of based haven, but the problem that he's going to have to be on constant guard, because all it takes is for one victory for the gay over there, and everything he's worked for is undone. And that is the unfortunate thing.
Well, I will say this. I was actually listening to a stream earlier today about Orban, and apparently even the left in Hungary these days are completely anti-mass immigration, because if they're not, they've got no chance of getting elected. So he's pulled the left to the right.
Yeah, I mean the second party in Hungary is actually a even more nationalistic right-wing party, which I've covered on my channel. I did and again, if you check it out, I did a reading of Julius Evolar's it was a youth right wing handbook, and that was pivotal in Hungarian right wing politics as a way to, because it has to ideally it has to end any right wing politics, whether it be reform. Let's talk about reform for a second in the UK. It has to be pushed by the youth, and that's something that is it's very difficult in this country. But the future of this country has to be in the minds and the spirit of the youth. Now, the problem is in that handbook, it sort of says, well, the youth needs to go to camps, basically, and reminiscence of mid-century German sort of style youth groups. But either way, in this country you have like air, sea cadets, army cadets. That could be a way in for that area. But yes, it has to be with it from the perspective of the youth.
Well, this is why I said we've got to destroy the Conservative Party, because that youth has got to have a party it can vote for, which is not traitorous, as the modern Conservative Party absolutely is.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because the Conservative Party, I mean, it never attracts the youth because it has to. First of all, if you look at the Conservative Party, they always, we want to attract the youth, but what they do is they pander to they are left wing in nature, so they will never get the youth because they're always pandering to left wingers who naturally fall into traditional left wing parties, and the right wing youth usually become either online racists or black pilled. They check out politics. I think there's a good portion of the UK of people who are naturally right wing or people who are traditionalists, and they just don't. They honestly just do not vote because they checked out politics maybe quite some time ago as well. I think back to the '97 election, in like 2001. The Conservative Party was quite weak then. It was at its weakest. They were, especially in '97. But at the same time, they always talk about the Conservative voters that switched to Labour, but a good portion of them just didn't vote. They just didn't bother to vote.
Yeah, I just want to see people. I'm not going to tell people not to vote. Vote for one of the smaller right of centre parties. Vote Reform or vote for any of those other smaller right of centre parties. I'm not going to tell anyone not to vote. And I'm certainly not going to suggest to anyone that they should vote Labour or Green or Lib Dem. But you should vote for one of those smaller right of centre parties.
Yeah. And also,
even if you don't totally agree with them, and like I've got loads of issues with some of Reform's policies, but just want to destroy the Conservatives. And the Conservatives are going to get they're probably going to get the worst beating they've had since World War II at the next election. It's our one big chance to try and destroy them.
And the Reform Party, if they are to be like, or whatever is united, I know there's been talks of like a Reform SDP alliance, whatever comes from it. In '97, in the early 2000s, you had BNP and then UKIP, and their focus was, well, we're going to take focus mainly on Labour voters, and that's fine, okay, fine. But in this day and age, those sorts of voters very rarely exist, and so and ultimately, if you to destroy the Conservative Party, you actually have to. Yeah, anyone who votes Labour now are usually ethnic minorities, or they're so far gone, they're not in your target range. So you just write those people off immediately.
Yeah.
You now need to focus on people who vote Conservative at the last election, and you focus on them. You focus on them wholly, and you forget about Labour. You forget about the Lib Dems. That would be the sensible thing to do, because that's how you destroy the Conservative Party. But the problem
the other thing they've got to do is that they've got to point out that lots of these people voted for Brexit, and Brexit has been totally betrayed by the Conservatives. As Farage quite often says, we've got Brexit in name only, really. And if the rumours coming out at the moment are true, and I strongly suspect that they are, with what the Conservative Party wants is a Switzerland-style deal with the EU, which would basically give Britain all the problems of being in the EU with none of the benefits. It's and you've got to sell it on that. You've got to sell it on the 500,000 immigrants that came into UK this year under a Conservative government. Net immigrants, so actually it was more than that, but net it was 500,000. And you've got to sell it on stopping mass immigration. I mean, that's what Reform should be campaigning on. They should be campaigning on getting a real Brexit and on stopping mass immigration. And most people will support them on those two things. Because not only is mass immigration in itself bad for the country, because obviously it's bad for the culture, Britain's already an overcrowded island, but it's also putting enormous pressure on house prices, so that you get young British couples who can't afford to buy a house, and it's also putting constant downward pressure on wages. It shouldn't be a hard sell.
Yeah, and we've never actually had an opportunity to insert those arguments into the mainstream discourse to any particular level. And of course, that is an opportunity that, like, the Reform Party's probably going to get in the coming years.
Yes.
And of course, you know, that will come with its own problems. Like, you know, obviously there's a chance that a lot of people in the Reform Party will just be there to subvert that argument or diminish it or misdirect it. But you know. Yeah,
look, you can't at all claim that any of this is easy or even necessarily going to succeed. But I think it's our only damn chance. I really do. I think without that, we are stuffed unless there's a civilizational collapse.
I don't know a super great deal about the British politics in the current period, but I have a feeling that they've got a bit of a catch-22 with you know, what with the Reform Party being that you know, eventually there are going to be defectors from the Conservative Party, and more of them as they realise that they are destroying the country. But then how do you gatekeep against the ones that were in the Conservative Party that were the subverters? It's like, what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I think you need to just look at it from a neutral perspective and see it as a platform that you can use, not as a platform you're going to build up or work in, but just as something you can very cynically use for our benefit, the benefit of our guys. You know, because the thing is with British politics generally is it's so devoid of energy and has been for so many years now that even if you joined the Tory party as like a relatively young guy, well-spoken, well-read, whatever, you could be standing on a stage next to the current or future Prime Minister within months. You know, and those same opportunities are going to exist in Reform, but just to a smaller scale, which also means that you can probably do quite a bit more from a ratio perspective with what you're given.
I agree. I do agree. All right, guys. Any final points from people that you'd like to bring up?
No, none from me.
Mitch?
I mean, I would say, I'm not going to bother saying anything because I'm black-pilled on the subject, but yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. Anything anyone would like to shill, which I forgot to do last week?
Yep. Make sure everyone goes onto Duke's channel and watches the Australian history stream that we did on Thursday, or was it Wednesday? Sorry.
Yeah, and we'll have another one coming up.
Yep.
In a week or so.
Yep. We'll be talking about convicts and the relationship of the convict transportation in relation to America. And all that sort of stuff. Very interesting stuff. I'm learning a lot, and I'm absolutely loving it. And I hope to pass it on to our friends.
And also go and check out Chris Gard's YouTube channel, especially if you're into music.
Do that too.
It's called Chris Gard, but the details will be in the description later on. Mitch, anything you wanted to show?
No, I can't say there is.
Attaman?
No, I've actually been a bit lazy the last couple of weeks, so I've got nothing.
Attaman does have a channel. It's called Bowden Bomber on YouTube. Do go and check that out.
I haven't uploaded anything in the last couple of weeks, but I will be.
Okay. And AI, your YouTube channel?
Yeah, my Tory. As I say, I haven't really done anything recently, but there's plenty of content on there to check out.
All right, no worries. I think we've gone for nearly 2 hours, which is probably enough. Thank you to everyone in the chat and those people watching. Hope you enjoyed our 100th show. And we're going to finish up with some music, as we always do. Okay, that was, of course, the Black Bear, which is a very famous military bagpipe tune from Scotland. Two things I'm going to share before we go. As Chris was saying, we've got another Australian history stream coming up. Chris and I, and maybe some guests, perhaps, not sure, which will either be next week or the week after. I'm not too sure yet. I need to speak to Chris about that. And we should also be doing a Victorian election stream, or looking at the results of the Victorian election at some point over the next few days, hopefully with the Franklin. But I saw that his son was ill last night, so we'll see what's going to happen with that one. But yeah, so look out for those, and of course we'll be back next week.
Can I just add just a quick thing too? A lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about in the Australian history stream, anyone that's got like some good knowledge of English history in the 17 and 1800s, it'd probably be worth having you on alongside, because a lot of it is very pertinent to that sort of period and the overflowing of prisons and stuff. So this is not exclusive to just Australians. This is very deeply tied to England. So if anyone's interested in joining in and having a chat about it, that'd be really good.
Yeah, if you're into your late 18th and early 19th century British history, you could certainly add some stuff to that for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right. So look out for those guys. Please don't forget to like the stream, and if you've not already subscribed, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we will see you soon. Go well.
Hooroo.